Philosophers talk to our times towards an ethnography of a poisoning mind. One of the effects, Nietzsche says it, of humans losing their faith in God was that they wouldn't understand what that meant. They wouldn't understand how that opened up into a nihilism, as they were unable to change all the things that challenge all the ideas that it challenged. How most people will go, oh, God's dead, and just carry on as normal. And yet, almost all their epistemology, and absolutely all their ontology, was tied up with the existence of the concept of God. And so simply to remove God from the picture does nothing. Remaining culturally Christian, I suppose, but you remain culturally monotheistic, conceptually monotheistic. One's knowledge is still rooted in God. And therefore, I would draw out 4 ways that this challenges us. 4 ways we have over the last, over 120 years since Nietzsche wrote 140 years actually, have absolutely failed to understand what it means to have lost our faith. So much so that a part of the crisis of sanity of the Western world, a crisis that sees us actively caught suicidal nihilism, is caught up with this failure to grasp what it meant 150 years ago to fundamentally lose our faith. I'll divide it up, I suppose, into 4 quite distinct categories. The first 2 are obvious. The second 2, they're a bit more philosophical, just because I want to make certain points. The first and most obvious is that losing the concept of the self changes what you have to understand objects are. Our entire ontology and epistemology that supports it, underpins it, was tied to a relatively simple equation. The world was out there and the world was inside here. We learnt directly about the world. Oh, it's an old story. And God was the guarantee. God was the guarantee that our perceptions of the world and the world themselves were caught up in the same picture, caught up in the same basic idea. And it might be God that was directly guaranteeing it, which it was most of the time, or perhaps it was something that God gave us, reason, say. But that reason, and this is the Kantian version, was capable of understanding an objective world, was capable, therefore, of portraying the world as it actually is. And therefore, we can still have some sort of affinity. Even if the world beyond us is unknown, it's the thing in itself, we can still have it as an objective reality, because reason gives it to us as an objective reality, free from interest, free from anything too undivine. So that Kant manages to reintroduce a vein of the divine, the ultimate reason, within the way we understand the outside world. But what if that all goes? What then? There is no necessary reason beyond our own survival, after all, between why we understand the world as we do. There's no reason why that has to accord with the actual world as it is in itself. On the contrary, Nietzsche, using Schopenhauer, I think, rather than following him, would argue that actually the world in itself is almost certainly radically different from the way we, a little lump of it, understand it. We are caught up in our own wills to power, and he kind of replaces then the idea that there are just objects with forces, powers, whisks, ways that we're caught up, ways that the world catches us up, ways that other things catch themselves up with. Forces that have no centre, that are open, that can move and move and move again. And our understanding is merely a refraction into ourselves of such forces that are deprived of any locus, that pitch across the universe. It's an unquieting effect of the death of God, because it implies the death of everything that we think simply. You have to re-examine where you are and where it is, how your perception is born from A conflict of power. I don't like the word conflict there. A confabulation of powers between you and it, and your understanding and its understanding. It is no wonder that we have ignored that implication. But if you do ignore the implication, what then? You get a kind of a fetishization of objects. Objects become their own deep truth. Somehow there in the world for you to own. You get a fetishization and a cult of objects as they guarantee your sanity. Own this and you will be sane. Secondly, just as problematically, the one I always come back to, because it's the one that matters most to me, just personally. It's why I am an atheist. It's not about God. I don't care about God much. I never have done. It's about the soul. Because without God, the way we understand mortal souls shift and change. Oh, you can pretend. Absolutely. Why not? You could go along with an awful lot of modern atheism, which simply wants to reinvent the soul. But why would you bother? Why would you have to fuse your identity into a single simple being when you could float across the universe, when you could dream otherwise, dream differently, when you don't have to be one thing anymore, one person, hold down a single identity at a certain time? Our experience of our own identities is far more complicated than just being here, now, one thing for one time till you die, one being over the course of a life, but also over the course of a day at a different rhythm. One has many different ways one is, as one is caught up in a whole nexus of different social relations, different ways you can become, different ways you can be. And the problem with mortal souls is that they have to be arbitrarily defended. You have to assert your right to be this one thing again and again and again. Scratch a cultural Christian, find a fascist. It's one of the deep laws. Because once you are holding on to a single identity in a world beyond God, when such identities are clearly unguaranteeable, the only way you can defend it is through violence, through force, through the assertion of natural right or an appeal to history or genetics, none of which is convincing, none of which actually marries with what is happening in the world. All of which therefore has to be randomly asserted and forced, so that gender has to become one of the deep truths of reality to replace what God once was, as do genes, as do biology and the rest. And it creates, to my mind, severely demented minds that are trying to recreate what they lost when they lost their faith. That is any sense or unity of the soul. Third, the death of God challenges our conception of power. You see, God had an entire theory of power that went with God. That there was God and God's representatives, and that was powerful, and they had power, and that was what power was, and that was that. And so rulers had power because they were rulers. Kings had power because they were kings. Companies, corporations had power because they were what they were. And that was it, and that was all there was to be said about the matter. Nothing else. They just were. And so we had a very good, easy, lazy version of power. Power was top down. Power was what the powerful wielded when they became powerful. Behind God's power there is a tautology. God is defined as that which is most powerful, and therefore God is powerful. And the power of God is the being of God. It allows you to not need to think what power is properly. And the minute you replace God, then all power becomes challengeable. All power becomes open, able to be shifted, to be moved, to be challenged, to be reinterpreted. You're in the world of Foucault, where you have to understand in something like education, not just the way it is imparting knowledge, but also how that knowledge is caught up within a framework of discipline that is indistinguishable from it. That as people know the world, they know themselves, and they plug themselves into a great system for being standardized, routinized, selected. Power then shifts. Genuinely, power beyond God is a complicated affair, because it is no longer simply localized in a person or a place. It becomes far more open, far more difficult. And you can see it. You can see it because one of the things that is happening now is that America is being systematically destroyed by somebody who simply believes in the power of America just by shouting it loud enough. I'm powerful, that's it. And doesn't understand how power is wielded. In many ways, seems to have no conception about what actually power is. How it evolves, I think has no conception. And all his handlers seem to have no conception of power. It's why this modern form of the far right is so stillborn. It's because the people who are making the appeal to power don't really have a grasp of what power is. Or if they do, it's only one sort of power. It's the power of the media to assert who is powerful. And absolutely nothing more. Then becomes something we will have to negotiate, discuss, evolve. Nothing becomes fixed. All the rules shift and change. Political systems become open. Anything, even holy capitalism, is mortal in the end and has to be understood through its mortality as much as its impersonification of power. And again, our failure to want to grasp that world is one of those deep ways we are driving ourselves mad as we worship the old power systems that are bequeathingly becoming utterly bankrupt. 4. Concept of nature. One of the logical hold functions for the death of God, if you want to reinvent spirituality as you understood it before, is of course nature. It is not for no reason that Spinoza will say, Deus si naturata. Naturans? Probably naturans. God, that is nature. God or nature. For understanding what God is and how God's power is used. There is a sense that simply that once you get rid of one God, you can keep a large chunk of your faith within some sort of paganism. It makes a conceptual sense. After all, once you've said that there isn't a God, you are saying that there is something in the world that thinks. Something that doesn't have a mind. It is, if you like, a thinking element, which is us. We are that thing. The universe thinks through us. A thing that can understand time to a degree and understands where it is. The universe has, therefore, in a sense, intelligence, in that we have intelligence. And where that intelligence comes from and how that dovetails into the wider world, into the material world we perceive, becomes a real question in a world beyond objects and all that jazz. So that there is a real conceptual reason why some sort of open-ended paganism becomes a very viable faith. And yet it creates a world that is too simple, a nature that is too simple. This is just the natural world. Of course, Spinoza would never make that mistake. The natural world has shifted over the course of the years. There's never one nature. Nature is always an evolving system that is never complete in itself, that is always open, always changing. It itself is its own power that is never unitary. God or nature is not a fixed thing, but something in the middle of being changed. Likewise, it is clear that the same events that happen in nature, nature is then not the guarantee of sets of events, that which holds them and systematizes them. It is rather the sets of events, the way the world has changed, the striking of meteors, the eruption of volcanoes that challenge and change nature. Nature would be a god, but it would be a reactive god, a last stage god, a god at the end of the process when causal reality just says, well, that leads to that, that leads to that, that leads to that, so that's extinction. God or nature needs to be thought then as something that is actually directly challenging, because it is the ultimate way in which we will be asked to atone, that we are all caught up within each other, that the evolving system never finishes. It's always open to new events, can always be shifted and changed elsewhere. So that you can have a straightforward paganism, But that paganism has to open up into a world where it itself is never quite finished, where itself is always fixed, is never fixed, but evolves. It creates then a world that is profoundly unsettling, a world where it is terribly easy for humans to wipe themselves out, to destroy their very possibility of existence. And no God will save you. And it is the fear, the press of that version of nature, of course, that is weighing upon all our souls. It's that silent fear that is like the fear that's stalking France at the moment, the fear of fire. For we can all smell smoke, although we are actually 300 miles away from the nearest real fire. It's that fear that won't let you go, that drives you back into the arms of the endless false gods that humans are adept at creating. We are then not just worshipping the shadow of some dead god, as Nietzsche said in Gay Science. We rather recreate him. We refuse to understand what it meant to have killed God, and rather drive ourselves mad and destroy ourselves in the very agony of our impossibility to think what we have done.